Jimi Hendrix poured lighter fluid on his guitar, knelt down in front of it like he was praying, and set it on fire. The crowd of 7,000 people went completely silent. What led to this moment would change rock and roll forever. It was June 18, 1967, at the Monterey County Fairgrounds in California. The Monterey Pop Festival was in full swing, and it was already being called the most important music event of the decade. The lineup was insane. Janis Joplin, The Who, Otis Redding, Jefferson Airplane, and dozens of other acts that would define a generation. But there was one name on that lineup that most Americans had never heard before. A guitarist from Seattle who'd spent the last year becoming a sensation in London. His name was Jimi Hendrix, and he was about to introduce himself to America in the most unforgettable way possible. Jimi had arrived at Monterey with something to prove. In England, he was already a star. Eric Clapton had seen him play and reportedly considered quitting guitar. The Beatles had attended his shows. He'd been on British television and radio. But in his home country, in America, he was nobody. "It's strange," Jimi told a reporter the day before his Monterey performance. "I left America as a nobody, made it big in England, and now I'm coming back to introduce myself to my own country. It feels like I'm starting over, but this time I have something to say." What Jimi didn't know was that he wasn't the only performer at Monterey with something to prove. The Who, the legendary British rock band, were also relatively unknown in America. They'd built their reputation in England partly on their wild stage antics, particularly Pete Townshend's habit of smashing his guitar at the end of every show. The festival organizers had scheduled both acts for the same night. The Who would play first, then Jimi Hendrix would follow. It seemed like a good idea at the time, 2 British acts back to back. But backstage, it was creating tension.
Pete Townshend was nervous. He knew about Jimi's reputation as a guitarist. Everyone in the British music scene knew that Jimi could do things with a guitar that seemed physically impossible. But The Who had their stage show, their destruction, their chaos. That was their thing. "We're going to destroy our instruments tonight," Townshend told his band in the dressing room. "We need to make sure America remembers The Who." In another dressing room, Jimi was having a very different conversation with his manager, Chaz Chandler, and his press agent, Michael Goldstein. "The Who are going on before you," Chandler said, "and I just found out they're planning to smash their equipment." Jimi smiled. "I know. Pete told me." "That's their finale," Goldstein added, looking worried. "They're going to smash guitars, destroy the drum kit, the whole thing. You're going to have to follow that. The crowd is going to be wild." Jimi sat quietly for a moment, tuning his guitar. Then he looked up at his team with that slight smile he got when he had an idea. "So they're going to destroy their instruments?" Jimi asked. "Yes," Chandler confirmed. "Okay. Then I'll sacrifice mine." The difference in those 2 words, destroy versus sacrifice, would define what happened next.
When The Who took the stage at 11 p.m., they were everything people expected and more. They were loud, aggressive, and absolutely explosive. Pete Townshend windmilled his guitar like his arm was a weapon. Keith Moon attacked his drum kit like he was in a fight with it. Roger Daltrey swung his microphone in dangerous circles above his head. The crowd was mesmerized. This wasn't just music. This was controlled chaos. This was violence as performance art. Then came the finale. Pete Townshend lifted his guitar high above his head and smashed it into his amplifier. The sound of wood splintering and strings snapping echoed through the fairgrounds. He smashed it again and again until the guitar was nothing but broken pieces. Keith Moon kicked over his drums, threw his cymbals, and reportedly set off smoke bombs on stage. The band walked off, leaving absolute destruction behind them. The crowd went absolutely insane. People were screaming, jumping, losing their minds. It was the most intense thing most of them had ever seen at a concert. Backstage, Jimi Hendrix watched it all on a monitor. His band members, Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell, looked at each other nervously. "How are we supposed to follow that?" Redding asked. Jimi didn't answer. He just picked up his guitar, a Fender Stratocaster that he'd hand-painted himself, and walked toward the stage entrance. "Jimi!" Chandler called after him. "What are you going to do?" Jimi looked back with that enigmatic smile. "Something they'll remember." The crowd was still buzzing with energy from The Who's performance when Jimi Hendrix and The Experience took the stage. Many people were already leaving, assuming the night had peaked. They had no idea what was coming. Jimi walked to the microphone wearing a bright, elaborate outfit. A military-style jacket covered in patterns and colors. His afro was perfectly shaped. He looked less like a rock star and more like some kind of psychedelic peacock.
"Thank you very much," he said quietly into the microphone. His voice was soft, almost shy. "We'd like to start off with a song called Killing Floor." For the first few minutes of the performance, many in the crowd weren't sure what to make of Jimi Hendrix. He was clearly talented, but after The Who's explosive set, this felt almost subdued. People were talking, moving around, not fully paying attention. But then something started to shift. About 3 minutes into the set, during a guitar solo, Jimi did something that made everyone stop talking and start watching. He played the guitar behind his head, not just for a second as a gimmick, but for an entire complex solo, never missing a note. The crowd started paying attention. Then he played it with his teeth. Again, not just biting the strings for effect, but actually playing full musical phrases with the guitar held in his mouth. Now the crowd was riveted. By the time Jimi launched into Wild Thing, the entire fairground was focused completely on the stage. What had seemed like a quiet, weird performance had transformed into something hypnotic and unprecedented. Jimi played that guitar like it was an extension of his body. He made it scream, cry, moan, and wail. He created sounds that nobody in that audience had ever heard before. He was bending reality with 6 strings and an amplifier. But the real moment was still coming. As Wild Thing built to its climax, Jimi began to play more aggressively. He turned the volume up until the amplifiers were distorting. He created walls of feedback that sounded like sirens, like screaming, like the world ending and being reborn. Then he knelt down in front of his amplifier. The crowd wasn't sure what was happening. Was this part of the show? Was something wrong?
Jimi reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bottle. It was lighter fluid, the same stuff people used for barbecues and camping. A few people in the crowd started to realize what was about to happen. They started pointing, nudging their friends, but most people were still confused. Jimi poured the lighter fluid over his guitar, the instrument he'd been playing so beautifully just moments before, the instrument that had been producing sounds nobody thought possible. Then he pulled out a match. The fairgrounds went completely silent. 7,000 people held their breath. Jimi struck the match and held it up to the crowd, like he was showing them what he was about to do, asking permission, making sure they understood this was deliberate, not accidental. Then he touched the match to his guitar. The Stratocaster burst into flames. Orange and blue fire erupted from the body of the instrument, climbing up toward the strings, consuming the wood and the paint and the electronics. But Jimi didn't stand back. He didn't walk away. Instead, he knelt before the burning guitar like it was an altar. He bowed his head. He moved his hands over the flames in gestures that looked almost religious. The crowd was stunned into silence. This wasn't destruction, like what The Who had done. This was something else entirely. This was ritual. This was sacrifice. Jimi stayed there, kneeling in front of his burning guitar, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. The flames grew higher. The smoke billowed across the stage. The heat became intense enough that the other band members started backing away. Finally, Jimi stood up. He picked up the burning guitar by the neck and lifted it over his head, holding it up to the crowd like an offering. Flames dripped from the body. Smoke poured into the California night sky. Then he smashed it, not with the aggressive violence of The Who, but with something that felt more ceremonial. He brought it down hard once, twice, 3 times. Pieces of burning wood scattered across the floor. When he was done, Jimi simply walked off stage, leaving the flaming remnants of his guitar smoking behind him.
For a full 5 seconds, the crowd was absolutely silent. Nobody knew how to react. They'd never seen anything like this. Was it art? Was it madness? Was it genius? Or destruction? Or both? Then the applause began. Not the wild screaming from The Who's set, but something deeper. This was awe. This was the sound of people realizing they'd just witnessed something that would become legendary. Backstage, reactions were mixed. Some people were thrilled, some were confused, some were actually angry. Pete Townshend walked up to Jimi immediately. For a moment, nobody knew what was going to happen. Would there be a confrontation? Had Jimi upstaged The Who so badly that it would create bad blood? But Townshend extended his hand with a smile. "That," he said, "was brilliant. You didn't destroy your guitar, you gave it a funeral." Jimi shook his hand. "Your smashing was great too, man, very energetic. But yours meant something," Townshend said. "I'm just breaking things. You were saying something." That was the key difference that everyone who was there that night understood. The Who had destroyed their instruments in an act of rock and roll rebellion. It was exciting and wild and fun. But Jimi had sacrificed his guitar in an act of transformation. He'd turned an object into art through its destruction. The Monterey Pop Festival was being filmed as a documentary. The footage of Jimi burning his guitar would become one of the most iconic images in rock and roll history. Within weeks, everyone in America knew who Jimi Hendrix was. But the actual guitar, the burned, destroyed Stratocaster, took on a life of its own. Jimi left it backstage after the show, assuming it was trash, but a stagehand collected the pieces and saved them. Years later, those charred remains would be sold at auction for thousands of dollars. Today, fragments of that guitar are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and in private collections around the world. People treat them like holy relics. The Monterey performance changed everything for Jimi. Within a year, he would play Woodstock. He would become one of the most famous musicians in the world. He would revolutionize what people thought a guitar.
But he never burned another guitar on stage. When reporters asked him why, he gave different answers at different times. Sometimes he said it was too expensive. Sometimes he said it was disrespectful to the instrument. Sometimes he said the moment at Monterey was perfect and shouldn't be repeated. But the real answer might have been in something he told a friend years later. "I didn't burn that guitar to put on a show. I burned it because I needed to let something go. I was saying goodbye to the person I was before and becoming someone new. You can only do that once." The guitar burning at Monterey became the template for rock and roll spectacle. For decades afterward, artists would try to recreate that kind of shocking, memorable moment. They would smash instruments, destroy stages, light things on fire, all trying to capture what Jimi did that night. But none of them quite managed it, because they were missing what made Jimi's moment special. It wasn't planned as spectacle. It wasn't designed to be shocking. It was genuine transformation captured on stage. It was an artist saying goodbye to who he was and announcing who he would become. The people in that crowd of 7,000 people understood it. They felt it. That's why they went silent. That's why the applause came slowly. They knew they weren't just watching a show. They were witnessing a metamorphosis. Today, if you ask musicians about the most important moment in rock history, many of them will mention Jimi Hendrix burning his guitar at Monterey. Not because it was the best guitar playing, though the performance before the burning was incredible. Not because it was the most shocking thing anyone had ever done on stage, but because it was the moment when rock and roll stopped being just music and became art. Jimi Hendrix walked onto that stage as a talented guitarist who was unknown in his own country. He walked off as a legend. And the guitar that made that transformation possible, he left it behind, burning on the stage, a sacrifice to the music gods. The ashes of that guitar scattered in the California wind, but the image of Jimi kneeling before the flames, turning destruction into creation, has never faded. That's the real magic of what happened at Monterey. Jimi didn't just burn a guitar, he burned away the old world of rock and roll and showed everyone what the new world could be. A world where guitars could scream and cry, where performance could be ritual, where an instrument could be more than wood and wire. It could be a statement, a sacrifice, and a rebirth all at once. If this story of transformation and artistic courage moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to understand the difference between destroying something for attention and sacrificing something for meaning. Have you ever let go of something important to become something new? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video for more untold stories from music's greatest legends.